Hello there, World of Tankers. Welcome to the channel. Hopefully all of you are doing well out there. I'm, of course, your host, Droodles Blitz, and in today's video, we're going to be talking about the changes I feel should happen to World of Tanks Blitz in Tier 10. As we do know, there are always a lot of changes happening every single update, but there's one thing that I don't really do a lot of, and that is state my own opinions on what should happen to Tier 10 vehicles currently in World of Tanks Blitz. Tier 7, I would, but, well, as we know, with vehicles like the Smasher, the Annihilator, the Gravedigger, just so many overpowered Tier 7 vehicles, yeah, it's kind of a lost cause by now, so Tier 7 is no longer ever going to be the same as it used to be when it first came into the game, but Tier 10 still has some hope. Tier 10 is obviously the tier where every good player wants to show off their skills. Not only that, but people that have been playing the game for months and months finally make their way to a Tier 10 tank, and you obviously want to enjoy it. It's the final tier of the game, so I figured, you know what, in today's video, I want to talk about the personal changes I feel should happen to every single Tier 10 tank that needs changing in Blitz. So if you enjoyed today's video and you want to see more like it, please make sure to smash that subscribe button down below, as it helps out the channel a crazy amount. Now we're going to be starting off with the collectors and the premiums, because of course the collectors and premiums as a class aren't on the tech tree, so I can't individually look at them. So we're going to start off with the Chieftain Mark 6. Now in my opinion, the Mark 6 is actually a fantastic Tier 10 vehicle, and really nothing has to change on it. This is what an ideal good tank is. It has a lot of weak spots, very weak armor, very weak lower plate, has the cupola on the top, but to counter that, it's got good mobility, it's got a solid turret, and as well an extremely accurate gun with 3,000 damage per minute. That, in my opinion, is a very well balanced vehicle. Ever since it came into the game, it was very strong, but it never was overpowered, and that's something that I really liked about the Mark 6. Now, the WZ-111-5A, in my opinion, is definitely strong, but I do feel that it needs just a little bit more going for it, because the issue for me personally with the WZ-111-5A is that with all the other heavies being so overpowered, you know, like the IS-4 is just such a strong heavy compared to the most of the heavies in the class in E100, I just feel that the 5A needs at least maybe 250 more damage per minute, just something so that it's able to hold a line, because the main job of a 5A is to hold that gun depression spot so people can't push on it. But yeah, if you don't have enough DPM to scare the people off, then what's the point of holding that line if they're just gonna drive over? And maybe also maybe a little bit of hit point buff, because it's supposed to be like an IS-7, but it's only got 2400 HP. So a little bit of changes I feel should be on the 5A, but nothing too much. M60, in my personal opinion, is fine where it's at. The T95E6, I would just remove the cupola on the top. Everything else would be fine on the vehicle already. Moving on to the VK90, I would nerf the side armor a little bit, maybe 20 millimeters. If you've ever tried to shoot at the side of a VK90, you know what I'm talking about. It's absolutely ridiculous. It is now one of the strongest Tier 10 heavies in Blitz, and it kind of makes a mouse obsolete. So the VK90, I would nerf the side armor by about 20 millimeters. T22 medium, honestly, I would just leave where it's at. There's not really much you can change about it, to be fair, and I think it's fine. Maybe just nerf the damage per minute, maybe about by 200, just something to make it a little bit less deadly when you're trying to fight it in your other Tier 10 mediums. Super Conk, one thing I would change, and that is the accuracy. The Super Conqueror has some of the worst accuracy, in fact, the worst accuracy you will find on a Tier 10 122 or 120 in Blitz. It's sitting at .353, and the funny thing about that is my 130 millimeter on the WZ-111-5A has the exact same accuracy. So yeah, Super Conk, in my opinion, should be the same accuracy as like a E5 at .326. I think that would make it very nice. Actually, it's not even .326 on the E5. I think it's .318. So my personal opinion is the Super Conk should definitely have a more accurate gun. The aiming time's fine. The damage per minute's pretty good. I just think it needs a little bit more of a better dispersion. Now the Badger, there is another one simple thing that I think the Badger needs. I've been playing the Badger for the past month quite a bit, maybe about 100 games or so, and I've really been wanting to hone down what the issue is with this tank, because there's a lot of issues, but I never really figured out what the main issue was. But I was thinking about it, and it's just that people push on the tank. You've got 3,400 DPM, which is pretty solid, but why not more? On World of Tanks PC, which I know Blitz tries to not associate themselves with, but on World of Tanks PC, the Badger, of course, replaced the FE-Tune 5B183, and it's the most DPM heavy tank in World of Tanks PC, because of course it comes after the Tortoise, which is also at the time one of the most DPM heavy tanks. So the Badger on PC has like 4,400 DPM if you're running all the correct stuff, and on Blitz it's sitting at 1,000 less than that when you have vehicles like the SU-122-54 sitting at 4,200. So in my opinion, the Badger needs a massive damage per minute buff, maybe sitting just at 4,000 on the dot, because what's the point of running a Badger when you can literally go down a tier and run honestly a just as well armored and a little bit more mobile Yag Tiger? So yeah, I personally feel that the Badger just needs a lot more DPM. 500 more would make this tank from what is pushed on every time to a vehicle that, yeah, you really don't want to mess with on the front lines. Now, of course, I just want to say this now, that these are my opinions, so if any of you disagree, if any of you think I'm incorrect on these, please let me know in the comments down below. I'm always up to debate, or, you know, just agree with you if you change my mind or anything like that, because these are just opinions that I am stating. The 121B, I wouldn't change at all. I think that this is a fantastic tier 10 medium tank. And for the 30B, I would just give it 200 more DPM. Everything else is fine, but you'll notice that it's sitting at 2,829 DPM, and I think it should be sitting at a base of 3,000. I think that would be a pretty solid number for the vehicle, but everything else for the 30B is fine. So now that we've gotten through all of the collector vehicles, honestly, I think that they're pretty balanced as a class. There's only a couple that are really sticking out there, like the T22 medium and the VK90, but overall, I actually give props to Wargaming for not making all of the collectors and premium tanks at tier 10 absolutely overpowered. A lot of people call this game pay to win, but really, there's only 2 super strong collectors, and the VK90 I wouldn't even say is overpowered. It just kind of makes the mouse obsolete. But speaking of the mouse, let's get to the German tech tree first. Well, actually, I guess we'll start off with the Americans, because it's all the way at the top. So, the T110E4, that is a vehicle, of course, we all know needs a little bit of love. Now, the E4, in my opinion, just needs one simple thing changed on it. First of all, I think it should get 7 or 8 degrees of gun depression. I think that would make it very flexible. And not only should it get a little bit more gun depression, but just remove the cupola. If you remove that weak spot on the top, this vehicle becomes immensely strong. Because when I shoot at the tank, I just shoot at the roof of it, hit the cupola, even if I don't pen it. I'm usually not exposing my tank because I'm shooting at something that is above his gun, so he can't look up at me while I'm trying to shoot that. So that's one thing about the E4 that I think should just be slapped right off, kind of like the E5. Get rid of the cupola and it will make the tank so much more strong. The E3, I wouldn't change anything about it. It's already a very solid tank. In fact, I would actually say remove the speed buff on the vehicle, because there's no point to have a speed buff on a tank that was already the top performing tank destroyer before they gave it to it. The T110E5 is another extremely strong tier 10 heavy tank. Once again, I would remove the reactive armor from this tank. Speed buff is fine. I think that it's used in comp because of that. But at the same time, what is the point of reactive armor? It literally takes away 20% of the damage you receive. And I kind of find that unfair compared to other heavies. Like, that's kind of breaking the limits of what I feel Blitz should be. So my opinion is no vehicle in the game should have reactive armor. I feel that that's kind of an excuse to not know how to balance out a vehicle. If you want to balance out a tank, you should balance it statistically. You should not balance it by giving it a consumable, which just makes you stronger than any other tier 10 for 25 seconds. So then we got the Patton. Now, the Patton is a vehicle that a lot of people say is bad. I actually don't mind it too much, but I will say I think it needs a way more accurate gun. The M60, the reason why I said leave it is because it's a more accurate Patton. So honestly, Wargaming, if you just swap that M60 gun onto the M48 Patton, I think you'd be completely fine. It has decent damage per minute as it is. It's sitting at around 3,000 base. So just if you make the gun like 0.308 dispersion and you give it a little bit better aiming time, I honestly think the Patton would be a fantastic tier 10 medium. T57 heavy, I wouldn't change at all. I think it's already fine. Honestly, I would nerf the 57 heavy on the interclip to maybe 3 seconds because, oh my god, is that 2.5 second interclip overpowered in certain scenarios. The Sheridan, well, we all know what my big change to that would be. There's actually 2 big changes. First of all, remove the gun that's on the tank. Completely remove the gun, put it in the trash, burn it. Then to get out another 152 from the T49. Put that T49 gun on the Sheridan, give it the same heat, give it the same high explosive, just give it a little bit more aiming time and a little bit better accuracy, and that's it. Because the point of the Sheridan, just like it is on PC, is either to run the M48 Patton gun, which would be the other option, run the 105mm that an M48 Patton would have, and run it as a stealthy medium/light tank that can get nice pot shots off and back into cover, or you can give it the 49 gun where you have a little bit more fun, but there's no missiles. And as you all know, I am still and never will be the biggest fan of missiles. Just being able to shoot somebody when they don't shoot you back is something that I will never ever agree with on Wargaming standpoint. Now moving on to the grill. The grill is something that I feel that Wargaming has really messed up. I think that the DPM is way too much. Sitting at 3,379, and by the way, I am running calibrated, it's at like 3,700 if you're running gun rammer, which in my opinion is good, but it can't ever use the DPM because of course you're always hiding in the back of the map trying to get shot after shot out. So in my opinion, the grill should have a better camouflage rating. It should be sitting at around 3,200 damage per minute. Not base, I think that should be with gun rammer, 3,000 base, and then just give it a good camo rating. The reason the WT is so broken is because of the camo. It's able to stay at the back of the map and literally peek out and never be detected and get away with it. So the grill, not necessarily as good camo as the WT, but I think it should have at least a 20%, 30% better camouflage rating than it currently does have. The Jagdpanzer 100, I wouldn't change at all. I think it's actually very balanced. Maybe just make the on-movement dispersion a little better because, oh, it misses a lot of shells that sometimes it shouldn't. But yeah, I think the Jag is actually very well balanced. Same for the VK72. I think it's a very well-balanced vehicle, and there's not much that needs to be changed on it. The mouse is a vehicle that definitely needs some changing, and it's in a good way, because the mouse's upper plate is weak, which is weird when you hear that, because it's the heaviest tank in the game. Yeah, the mouse should have a way stronger upper plate. In my opinion, the mouse's upper plate, I don't care, make it 1,000 millimeters thick, you should not be able to penetrate through the upper plate of the heaviest tank in Blitz with premium rounds. An IS-4, a Badger, honestly a VK90 face-hugging it could penetrate through the upper plate of a mouse. Heck, even a mouse can penetrate through the other mouse's upper plate, and it's got terrible premium pen at 327. The mouse's upper plate should be 500 base, and that's a very strong opinion I have, but of course you should not be able to penetrate through the strongest part of a tank, the upper plate. The turret cheeks are fine, I don't mind the lower plate, just the upper plate of the vehicle. An IS-4 should not be able to face hug you and be able to pen you while you can't scratch him at all, something I will always disagree with. The mouse should be virtually impossible to pen on the upper plates. So let's keep looking at the Germans. We are now on the E100. I wouldn't change the E100 at all. I think it's actually very strong where it's at, and it doesn't really need to be changed in the first place. The E50M I think is also a very strong, solid tier 10 medium. I wouldn't really change anything on the E50M, and as we know, the Leopard is an extremely strong tier 10 medium currently with 3,660 something DPM. I would leave the Leopard where it's at as well. So a lot of changes, and as well a lot of things staying similar. Now the Object 268 I think is fine. Leave that one where it's at. Object 263 is a tank I think needs to be changed. And there's one thing that I feel needs to be changed. Nothing else, just the gun mantlet. The gun mantlet is the biggest weak spot on this tank, and it honestly causes it to get quite frustrating when you're just tapped right through it. I think the gun mantlet on this vehicle should be 500 millimeters thick. Now yes, of course, that's again a very strong opinion. It would make the tank, though, extremely strong on the battlefield, because when you're trying to shoot people and they just aim at your gun mantlet and then back up in the cover, it's not really fun. Not only that, but it damages your gun half the time. It pens every time. It's really not fun trying to use 5 degrees of gun depression and get out your DPM as people are just shooting premium shells at your gun mantlet. So I think that, yeah, premium should not be able to pen through a gun mantlet. That's the whole point of it, is it's to block the shells. So yeah, personally, I feel that that should be impenetrable. You can shoot the cheeks, don't care about that. You can shoot the lower plate, the side armor, just not the gun mantlet of the vehicle. Make it a little bit stronger at least, just strong enough to bounce heat shells from heavies. So moving on, let's take a look at what's next. The Object 140 is a vehicle that's obviously been left behind. Now, I would not give it more gun depression. I think setting at 6 degrees is fine, and I think the gun is fine as well. All I feel is that the Object 140 needs a stronger turret. Make it like it used to be. Make it 280 millimeters effective on the front. Make it so that standard shells cannot penetrate through the roof of it. You can easily overmatch the roof of a 140's turret. In my opinion, you should not be able to penetrate the turret of the 140. I think that's the gimmick that it needs, and it would be an extremely strong tier 10 medium if that did come to be the case. And the 62A, yeah, I think it should go back to 5 degrees of gun depression. Everything else just stays the same, but I don't ever know why Wargaming gave it 7 degrees in the first place. Go back to 5, and everything else can be the same, and it would be honestly a fine tier 10 medium. It would kind of give the Object 140 back the old advantages it had, because the 62A is literally just a better 140 now. It's got more gun depression, more turret armor, it's got a more accurate gun. All it doesn't have is having AP as a standard shell, so yeah, not super fun. Now the IS-7, I actually don't know if there's much I'd change on the IS-7. Maybe I would just give it a little bit of an upper plate buff, just enough to bounce maybe a little bit easier of standard shells. Not enough to bounce premium, but I think standard shells do penetrate a little bit too much. And as well, I would make the ammo rack 20% stronger, because you shouldn't be ammo racked every time you're shot. Not like dead ammo racked, but I mean just getting your ammo rack damaged in the first place is kind of annoying on the vehicle. So I'd change that a little bit. Now IS-4, I would not only remove 250 of its hit points, making it around 2550, I think would be fine on the IS-4, but at the same time, I think that the IS-4 needs a penetration nerf. It's sitting at 374 millimeters, which is stupid. You shouldn't be able to negate all armor. As I said, not only can an IS-4 penetrate through the upper plate of a mouse, but at the same time, an IS-4 can literally negate any heavy tank armor, and its armor itself is overpowered beyond belief, as we do know. Now, the IS-4 is not necessarily an overpowered tank. It's strong in every single aspect, which that's what makes it so, I would say, good on every single scenario, but I'm not going to call it OP. It's just an OP armor profile. I will say that. So the IS-4, I would change on the armor maybe a little bit, or the penetration values, because it's definitely a little bit too strong in either. And if you want to leave that penetration on it, then remove 20-30 millimeters off the upper plate, because you can't penetrate it when your gun doesn't have that same penetration. So now we get to move on to the British. Now the British is a weird class at that. The 183, there's only one thing I would change on it. Give it about a 10-15% better camo, because the 183 is meant to stay at the back of the map. It's meant to get out big shots. And when you can't get those shots out because you're constantly detected by mediums and lights, especially with there being more mediums and lights in Blitz, yeah, not necessarily super fun. So personally, change the 183's camo, leave everything else the same, because it's already a pretty decent tank. The 4005, I think, is actually fine right where it's at. It's super deadly, it's quick, it's got a good accuracy gun. Honestly, maybe just make the accuracy or the aiming time a little bit better, just so you don't have to worry about it, you know, missing some shells into the dirt like it will occasionally do. But honestly, I don't mind the 4005 at all. I think it's a fine vehicle. FE4202, make the chart a little bit stronger, or change it out for the Centurion Action 10, or yeah, it is the Centurion Action 10. I would much rather have that as a tier 10, because it's getting like your Cent 7-1. Imagine a Cent 7-1, just a little bit more mobile and a stronger turret, but the same hull armor, same side armor, actually a weaker hull, just at tier 10. So it's got the opposite of an FE4202. Instead of an extremely strong hull, it would have an extremely strong turret, and everything else would be weak. And that, of course, is good, because when you're trying to get your HESH shells out, you're exposing your turret, which means you get shot. And that's why I don't like running this vehicle anymore, is because you just get shot through the turret and penned every single time. So either make the turret stronger on this vehicle and make the hull weaker, or just swap it out for the Centurion Action 10, which a lot of people have actually been agreeing with me lately. Now, the Vickers Light, I would actually, there's one thing I would say to do it. Make it a medium. Make the Vickers CR, make the Vickers Light, and the FE31 a medium tank. They are not lights. As you all know, their armor is way too strong to be counted as a light tank. There's not one light tank in PC other than like the WZ-131 that is meant to have a strong turret that is actually strong in the armor profile. And the WZ has no upper plate armor. It's literally like 100 millimeters. The Vickers Light not only bounces shells off the upper plate, which is stupid. It actually cannot be overmatched by any big caliber shells, because it's 120 millimeters. The side armor is thick as well. The Vickers Light is way too strong as a light tank. It should be a medium. That way the camo doesn't make it overpowered. And honestly, I think it'd be a very well-balanced medium tank. It's just the light tank camo, the spotting range it has, and it just being a light in general is what makes it so overpowered. Make it a medium, make it have a little bit worse power to weight, and I honestly think it'd be a very well-balanced vehicle. So what do we have next? Oh boy, the FE25B. Now this is a vehicle that I honestly think just shouldn't be in the game anymore. Just like World of Tanks PC, the FE25B is well past its due date. The issue is you can't really buff a vehicle that's really, really weak. Like maybe buff the frontal armor, maybe buff the side armor, but personally I feel they should have made the Super Conch the tier 10 just like PC did, and then brought the FE25B into maybe a collector that people already had, could have kept, because the issue with the Tune 5B is just that it's such a weird tank. It's such a weird armor profile. It's really hard to balance. And Wargaming tried balancing it by giving it those consumables, which, as I will always say, I don't really think giving tanks consumables is a correct way to balance out vehicles. So FE2 and 5B, I think, it's decent where it's at, but it definitely, I think the Super Conch should have really just replaced it. Moving on to Japan, we've got the STB-1. Honestly, STB-1 needs a big side armor buff. There's no reason why the STB is 75 millimeters on the side. The biggest weakness of the tank originally was that you could penetrate right through the sides, and you can't really do that anymore. So my opinion, the sides should be 50 millimeters thick at most, maybe even 40 millimeters. That way 120s can overmatch it. It's a really big weak spot if it was like that. But right now the STB, there's a reason why it's the strongest performing tech tree medium, and I definitely feel it needs a nerf on the side armor. Not only maybe the side, but also the upper plate. Not, you know, so that you can't be hauled down, but when you're on flat ground and that upper plate gets really troll bounces, kind of like the unnerfed T92E1, yeah, I definitely think that is kind of weird. So what else do we have for the tech tree here? We've got the Hori. The Hori, I wouldn't really change much. Honestly, I would just change one thing, and that would be the average damage for the premium. Why make the premium 15 less damage? There's no point. It's pretty much just like firing standard shells. Make the premium 500 average damage. That way it actually doesn't just absolutely spam you with premium shells all day and not worry about it at all. That's another thing I would change about the Hori, but honestly, the Hori is a weird vehicle as it is, and I think it's pretty well balanced in the class that it's in. in. The WZ-113 GFT, I would leave everything the same. I don't mind the speed consumables, I don't mind the aiming. I think it's fine where it's at. The gun is accurate, the DPM's solid, it's got good penetration. The WZ is a fine tier 10 tank destroyer. The WZ-121, I think is also pretty dang solid. I wouldn't change anything about it. Maybe make it about 200 less damage per minute. I don't think a vehicle with this much going for it should also have DPM with a very high caliber gun, maybe a little bit less DPM, but honestly, the 121 is a pretty solid tier 10 medium. And the WZ-113, this is a vehicle that I will always say I think Wargaming buffed incorrectly. Instead of buffing the DPM, go back to 3000 base. You can see it's 3200 base. Make it 3000, and then what they should do is they should either A, buff the upper plate so that it's a little bit stronger, not necessarily overpowered, but just enough to where you kind of need to fire premium the pennant, because right now, literally you can pen it with the most standard shells on the upper plate. But not only should the upper plate be changed maybe a little, but also it needs traverse. It's the most annoying thing, especially against light tanks when they can just drive over the hill, shoot you, and then get away. The 113 has literally one of the worst hull traverse rates in the game at 25.85. It is awful. It's literally turning slower than the Titanic. It would have not only hit the iceberg, it would have smashed into it. And that's something that's really annoying about the WZ-113. Personally, really need to make that engine power a little bit better, just so the traverse, maybe 35 degrees traverse, I think that'd be fine. Lower the DPM, that's something that I always wish. One thing I will argue, and I will always argue, that Blitz does wrong is they buff tanks. They don't balance them. They never balance vehicles out. You'll always notice that a vehicle like the AMX 30B is a perfect example of that. The 30B, when it came into Blitz, was a pretty solid vehicle. It was kind of similar to the STB-1. It had good DPM. You know, for the time, it had decent damage per minute, about 3,000 if you were running gun rammer. It had good armor, good mobility. It was really a strong tier 10 medium. In fact, I made a video the first time it came out saying it was overpowered. Nowadays, yeah, the 30B still can be a viable medium if you know what you're doing, but that's the same for any tier 10 in Blitz. The issue with the 30B now is it just doesn't stand up when you think about it tier for tier against all the other tier 10 mediums. So I think Blitz does a bad job of balancing out tanks because they don't balance. They just buff them. It started off with the E50M for the mediums. Then it went to the WZ-121. Then it went to the WZ-121B. Then it went to the T62A. Then it went to the STB-1. There are so many tier 10 mediums that have been buffed in the last year. It's ridiculous. And it kind of leaves vehicles like the Patton, the AMX-30B, other tanks left behind in the dust. I honestly feel Wargaming needs to balance out tanks statistically, not buff them. That's something that I will never agree with. Now, on to France, we have the Foch 155. There's one thing I would change on this vehicle. I think that the main gun is actually decent. I don't run it, as you can see, because I hate the on-movement dispersion. I missed 4 shells on the tank yesterday, and that was my last straw I actually put on the original gun. But the original gun should have 640 average damage for the standard, and it should be 960 on the high explosive. It's a 155, and it's only dealing 460 damage. Like, really? Come on, Wargaming. The Foch 155 should have 2 options. You should either have these smaller hitting shells, which the 560 Alpha, but the auto-loading, so you've got 3,200 DPM, or you should have the bigger hitting shells, which are 640 average damage, but a much longer reload. That's my personal opinion, and I feel that's one that a lot of people kind of agree with, judging that this tank originally had a 640 Alpha gun, and it was fine. If they just gave it that gun back, I think it'd be a fine tank, but yeah, I really wish that it would have 640, because as a lot of you know, I love Alpha more than I love DPM, and it's something that I'm actually kind of sad that I can't run the original gun anymore, because the whole point of the Foch was just to ram mediums and slam high explosive on the other side. So now we're on to the AMX 50B. Honestly, I wouldn't change a thing about the 50B. Very strong at where it's at. If you know how to play it, you'll do very well. The Batchat 25T is a tank, though, I would change. First of all, I would make the standard penetration 10 millimeters higher, just enough so that it doesn't struggle to penetrate tier 10 heavies, at least on the side armor. Not frontally, because frontally, of course, you shouldn't be able to pen them easily, but I think on the side armor it should be better. The heat, I would raise 10 millimeters, not the most, but just 10. I would make the heat shell velocity about 20% better, because it's very annoying on the shell velocity. And the biggest thing on the Batchat that I really think needs changing is the dispersion. We're getting buffed the on-movement dispersion, which was already fine on the Batchat. If we go take a look at my Bat, you will notice that the dispersion in general, because I'm running a refined gun here, is not the best. It's sitting at 0.326. That is the same dispersion as a T95E6, a tier 10 heavy tank. Like, really? Why is a Batchat, a tier 10 light, sitting at the same dispersion as a heavy? Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me, and it never will. I think the Batchat should be sitting at 0.308 dispersion, and I think you'd be fine. A lot of people say buff the intraclip. I also think that would be fine, but personally for me, I just think make the dispersion a little better, make the gun a little bit more accurate, and it will hit a lot more shells. You'll be able to be a lot more influential. And finally, making your way on to the Progetto 65 in the Kronwagen. The Kronwagen, I would anything about. I think it's pretty dang strong where it's at, and I'm going to have to see how it's statistically performing in the future. But for the Kron, there's one thing, though, I actually would change, and this is something that I have been coming up with lately. The Kronwagen on PC does not have 80 millimeter side. It's got like 35 millimeters, which makes sense. It's supposed to be overmatched by a lot of larger caliber shells, not by 100s, not by 120s, but 155s can overmatch the side armor. That was the weakness of the Kron. My opinion, make the side armor of the Kronwagen 35 millimeters thick, and then make the top speed of 40 kilometers per hour, because that's what it should be. I think it should be a little bit more mobile. If the tank's more mobile, it's not like it's going to be more overpowered, because you still can't get out more damage per minute. When I push this thing into position, it's not like I'm just, lobbing shells at everybody. It doesn't have enough DPM to do that, so give it a little bit more mobility and take away the side armor. And finally, we're moving on to the Progetto 65. Now, this is a tank that's had a lot of buffs and a lot of nerfs. My personal opinion is just make the gun a little bit more accurate. I cannot tell you how agitating it is where the gun just doesn't hit its shells. Wargaming nerfed the mobility and the gun. I think they should have done one or the other. Either give it better mobility or give it a more accurate gun, because, again, sitting at 0.326 dispersion is not very fun, especially for having terrible on-movement dispersion values. So these are my opinions for the Tier 10 class in World of Tanks Blitz. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below, if you agree or you disagree with any of my opinions. Now, this definitely was a longer video than normal, a 25-minute video at that, almost 26. So if you enjoyed today's video, please don't hesitate to smash that subscribe button down below. These videos take a little bit more effort. I gotta remember all my things for vehicles that I think should be changed, balanced, and buffed in World of Tanks Blitz. Now, if you agree with me, please let me know. If you disagree with anything, I'm always open to talk about it, as I said at the beginning. But other than that, hopefully all of you are doing well out there. Stay happy, stay healthy, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.